Hi, I'm Kasim Sultan. I am a Staten Island musician. I was born in 1955 in Brooklyn. We moved to Staten Island in 1962. I had just turned 7 years old, and I've been on Staten Island ever since. Um, I started in the music business. I don't know. I mean, like most people that I grew up with, we saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and we said, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. At that point, that was in 1964. And at that point, all bets were off. I didn't care about school. I didn't care about getting a job. I didn't care about anything other than being that person on stage performing in front of people. Hopefully, it would have been with screaming people, you know, night and day. But in any case, that started my journey in the music industry, or as a musician, really. And I started playing guitar. I took a few guitar lessons on Giffords Lane in Great Kills at a place called Giffords Lane Music. And I did about that for about 6 months. Because I was not a really good student, I wound up leaving the lessons. I didn't take any more lessons, and I'm self-taught. Like I said, I started as a guitar player, and then I met a couple of kids that moved into the block around me. After the Verrazano Bridge was built, we had an influx of people from Brooklyn. They wanted to get to the country, which was Staten Island, and there was a huge swath of row houses that were put up all over Staten Island, and overnight it became it went from a place of mom and pop stores and horse farms and drive-in movie theaters and wide open spaces to suburbia. And whereas when I grew up, I could have gotten lost in the woods behind my house. Now it was nothing but row houses. A couple of kids moved from Brooklyn. They were guitar players as well, and the younger one of the two brothers went to junior high with me, and he mentioned to me one day that he was starting a band, and would I like to be in the band? And I said, sure. I was 13 at the time. And he said, okay, well, what do you play? And I said, I'm a guitar player. He says, we don't need a guitar player. We need a bass player. I said, well, did I mention I'm a bass player too? And of course I wasn't, but I was willing to pick up the bass because I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be, and they were very good players at the time. My dad had bought me a few Christmases before that. He bought me a 1963 Gretsch double anniversary. The guitar was bigger than me. And while I would have loved to have had, excuse me, I would have loved to have had, kind of a sleek, really cool looking electric guitar. This was a good guitar. And I asked him if I could sell it to buy a bass, and he said, if that's what you want to do. I went to We Buy on 48th Street. It was a very, very popular buy and sell instrument place, run by the people who now, who right after that owned Sam Ash. And I sold it for $50. And I bought a Gibson EBO bass. But I still didn't have an amplifier. About 6 months later, after I was the bass player in the band, and we were, rehearsing every day in the basement on Amber Street in Oakwood Heights, they kicked me out of the band because I didn't have an amplifier. And I'll never forget the 3-block walk home. I was crying, like sobbing uncontrollably because I got fired from a band because they wanted a bass player who had an amplifier. So I told my mom, I'm going to show those guys. I'll show them. And I wound up I was determined. I was determined to make it in the music business as a singer, songwriter, musician, whatever it took. I was ready to do it. I practiced and practiced and practiced, and I come from. Actually, I should have prefaced this before. But I don't know how much backstory you want, but I come from a middle class family. My dad worked for RCA Communications, fixing teletype machines for about 40 years. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I have two brothers and one sister. I'm the oldest, and we just lived a kind of a real middle class life in Oakwood Heights, Staten Island for the longest time. I went to PS 50, which was about a mile away from home. I walked there every day, uphill both ways, and that's a joke. um, and I mean, we weren't poor, but we weren't rich. We were just right in the middle. Um, so I proceeded at that point. I guess it was the early 60s. It was still like 1963, 60, no, 66, 67, 68, something like that, to teach myself as best I could, as many instruments as I could. My girlfriend at the time, who wound up being my wife, I met in high school, and she worked at the Staten Island Advance. Her dad worked at the Advance, and she did as well. She saved up some money one summer and bought me a piano, and I was determined to learn how to play piano, and I taught myself how to play piano, and then through my diligence of this whole time, I was still determined to do as much as I possibly could in the music business. So I was introduced to a gentleman who was an engineer in Manhattan. He worked at Variety Studios. Through a mutual friend on Staten Island, I met Vinnie Leary, who was also in a band called the Fugs. And he kind of took me under his wing, and I became an assistant engineer at Variety Studios and a tape op at Sound Ideas on 46th Street. Variety Studios was 42nd Street. And I would go in at like, I don't know, I guess I was about 14 at the time. I would go into Manhattan at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, work on a session until midnight, and then come home. And this was like, I was on 42nd Street when I was like 14, 15, 16 years old. And it was not a great place. It was seedy, it was dangerous, but I didn't care. I would take the ferry home. I'd come back home at 16 years old, and then do the whole thing over again the next weekend, because I still was going to high school at the time. So like I said, my wife buys me an upright piano. I teach myself how to play. And I find out that a girl by the name of Cherry Vanilla is auditioning keyboard players for her band. And Cherry was at that time a publicist for David Bowie, or one of David's publicists, and she worked for the record company Main Man Records. Now this is, mind you, this is all at a time in Staten Island where there was a lot of people having some success. The most obvious being Earl Slick, who would become the guitar player for David Bowie and later John Lennon too. So Slick went from being a big name on Staten Island to a national fame, and Slick was integral in getting me into the New York music scene and playing in bands in the city. I went to the audition. I heard about the audition for Cherry Vanilla through a mutual friend. I went to the audition. There were two people auditioning at the time. It was myself and a guy by the name of Jan Mulaney, who lived on Staten Island as well. Jan's dad was a very successful record producer who actually wrote that song Popcorn. I can't play it, but that's how it goes. Anyway, So Jan auditions for Cherry Vanilla's band first, and Jan is a virtuoso. He's like all over the place. He's like he's better, and I'm like I might as well have been playing the piano like this, with the back of my hands because I wasn't very good, but I could sing. And Cherry loved the fact that I could sing and needed another singer in the band. So I got the gig. And it was a little daunting because it was a lot of work. The keyboard player, the piano player that I was replacing was a guy by the name of Patrick Henderson, who was a brilliant piano player and co-wrote a song with Michael McDonald called Real Love. It was tough, but again, I was determined to make it work. Through Cherry, I became friendly with a lot of people in Manhattan, one of them specifically being Michael Kamen. And Michael was very connected in the New York City music scene. He was in a band called the Rock and Roll Review in New York and a couple of other really great bands. He was friendly with a lot of people in the music industry, and he kind of took me under his wing to teach me how to play piano a little bit better because he was friendly with Cherry, and he was also friends with Slick. They were in David Bowie's band together during the Diamond Dogs tour. Michael Kamen was the musical director, and everything comes together. I know I'm kind of scattered, but. So I became friendly with Michael Kamen. I wound up meeting a bunch of really interesting people through Cherry in the New York music scene. I'm still working at Variety Studios and Sound Ideas as a tape op and assistant engineer. And I'm just doing as much as I possibly can to further my career in the music industry. And then the friend of mine who originally came and got me in Cherry Vanilla's band, Tommy Marangello, came to my house one night while I was living with my parents and said, I have to take Slick to the airport. Do you want to take the ride with me to JFK? I wasn't doing anything that evening. I said, sure, no problem. We drove the 3 blocks from Cedarview Avenue to Chesterton, where Slick was staying with his dad, and walk in the front door, and the first thing that Slick says to both of us is, either one of you guys want to play with Todd Rundgren? And I said, yeah, sure, let's both try it, Tommy. And Tom said, no, I don't want to do it. You go ahead, you audition. So Slick says, okay, when we get to JFK, call Michael Kamen and tell him that you're interested in the gig. Get to JFK, I put a dime in the payphone, and I called Kamen and said, Michael, I hear that Todd Rundgren is looking for a bass player. I'd like you to recommend me for the audition. And Michael said, you're a bass player? I didn't know you were a bass player. He said, I thought you were a piano player. I said, well, my first instrument is bass. And he said, okay, I'll recommend you. The next day I get a phone call inviting me to Woodstock to audition for the band. I borrowed $20 from my uncle to take an Adirondack Trailways bus from Port Authority up to Woodstock. And Todd was just coming back from India. He was doing a moped tour of southern India at the time. And I wound up playing for the drummer and the bass player, Willie Wilcox on drums and Roger Powell on piano. Learned a couple of songs, and then the next day Todd came in, we played together as a band, and I got the gig. And that was the start of my professional music career, because I wound up touring. We were touring the world right after that, and I wound up in the band. We were together for about 10 years, did a bunch of records, did the Meatloaf records and Utopia records. I wrote the only hit that Utopia had, which was a song called Set Me Free on Adventures in Utopia. And it was a great band, and I love it, and I love the time that I spent in the band. I'm still close with all the 3 other members, and I've had a wonderful career. I've not only played with with Utopia and Todd Rundgren, but with Patti Smith and Patti Smythe and Joan Jett and Hall and Oates and Richie Sambora, John Bon Jovi, Celine Dion. My career has been I've been blessed with a very very long and a wide range of artists that I've worked with over the years, and that's pretty much it. That brings me to today. Going to Cherry had she had this great loft on 18th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. It was so great. And we would go uptown to where her managers lived, and her managers lived in a building on the Upper West Side that was like the next apartment over was Blondie, was Debbie Harry, and she was just starting out as well too. And Patti Smith was just coming into her own at that time. There was such a huge music scene in Manhattan. I mean, there were bands like the Tough Darts and Another Pretty Face, and clubs like Max's, Upstairs at Max's, Club 82. If I sat and thought about it, I could probably come up with another half a dozen clubs that were the places to go back then. But it was just there was a wide range of music that was happening in Manhattan, in New York City at the time, and yeah, I was right in there with it. You know, it was a great time. I remember going to the Mercer Arts Center, which was another place that we went to see bands, and I saw the New York Dolls there for the first time, and I was just like I was watching. I could not believe that this band was playing. Like just a really really cool cool vibe, and really cool to be around the city at that time. This was the early 70s, 72, 71, 72, 73. Yeah, it was just a great time. So I remember, I distinctly remember when Mandolin Brothers was in Stapleton, because my dad was a pool player. Certainly not professionally or anything like. He liked playing pool, and he wanted to take his son to play pool. There was a pool hall. I want to say, I forget the exact street, but whatever street Mandolin Brothers was on, it was at the end of it by Water Street. And so we would take the train from Oakwood Heights to Stapleton, get off the train station, and if I'm not mistaken, Mandolin Brothers was right off the train station. You could the building that Mandolin Brothers was in originally, on the second floor, was right by the train station in Stapleton. And I remember, because I was about probably 9 or 10 years old at the time, or 11, and I remember passing by the sign for Mandolin Brothers on the building, and thinking, oh, I'd like to go in there one day. And then my dad would take me to the pool hall, and we'd play 9-ball for the afternoon or early evening. Anyway, then I'm not sure what year Mandolin Brothers moved to Forest Avenue. Do you guys know what year that was? No? No one knows?
No.
Okay. But what I do remember, so let me just preface this by when I was in that band, when I was in that band with the Rayo Brothers, and subsequent bands after that, and in my high school years, because we had remained friends even though I wasn't in the band anymore. We did remain friends, and we were like kind of like it was it was a very popular thing to be in a bunch of different bands at once. And so I was probably in a couple of different bands with the Rayo Brothers over the years, but one of the things that I remember most was this guy who made pickups, and we heard about him through mutual friends, And there was this guy down in on Van Duzer Street who was winding pickups for people. And you know, if you asked him, he'd wind a pickup for your guitar. It wound up being Larry DiMarzio. He had this little tiny shop right on Van Duzer Street at the corner before, again, I don't know the exact the cross street, but the building is still there. I'll never forget, it was a white door on the corner that faced caddy corner to the block, to the building. And that's where Larry started. Larry DiMarzio started making pickups in that building. And he would wind pickups for you if you were, you know, if he liked you. I wound up buying a couple of guitars from Larry over the years, and I still have the bass that I have a precision bass that I bought from Larry in 1982 or 83, I think. But Larry's a great guy. He's another Staten Islander that became very, very successful. And then there was always this kind of this idea that if you really wanted a really, really good guitar, you went to Mandolin Brothers. If you wanted a really good vintage guitar, you wouldn't go to Manny's, you wouldn't go to Sam Ash, you wouldn't go to Rudy's, you wouldn't go to Alex, which was all those four stores that I just mentioned were on 48th Street between 6th and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. That was Music Row. Unfortunately, there's none of them there today, but they were all there at the peak of the music, like the music fad for musicians in the 70s and 80s and the 90s too. I believe, I don't know when Manny's closed, but if you wanted a new guitar, you went to Manny's or Sam Ash or Rudy's or Alex. But if you wanted a really vintage instrument, you went to the Mandolin Brothers. And I'll never forget the first time I went in there. I was probably in my early 20s or late teens. And just looking around, the great thing about Mandolin Brothers was you could go in there, sit down in one of the rooms, because there was a bunch of little rooms off of the main showroom. And there was guitars everywhere. And there would always be a little stool in there, and you could sit and play, and no one would bother you. You could play an instrument for an hour, and no one would come in and say, "Are you going to buy that, or are you just going to play it?" So I would go in there and I would take a look at guitars and wish that I could afford them, because the prices were always astronomical there. I could never afford one of their guitars that I would really want, like a 1945 D28, or you know this Martin that you couldn't find anywhere else. You know, they always had like specialty instruments. That's what Stan really, that was his thing, was finding stuff that you couldn't find anywhere else. And you know, it was a great store to be in and be around. I've bought some guitars over there over the years, but you know, they were Stan and his partner. Who was this? Hap. Well, Hap. There was Hap, Stan, and there was another person too.
One after Hap.
Stan and I want to say Al. I don't know. It was Stan, and there was always two guys in there. Do we know who the other guy was? No, we don't. Okay. Yeah. So I Stan was he was a good guy. He would always talk to you. He'd always spend a little time with you, but Stan was all about business. He was definitely a businessman, and he was an encyclopedia of knowledge. when it came to vintage instruments, whether it was an electric guitar or an original Les Paul or some brand new D'Angelica or a National that was like you've never seen before, or Mandocello, or just like really kind of kooky instruments of a banjo, mandolin. Stan knew about it, where it came from, when it was invented, who invented it, the year the guy was born, when he died, and what it's worth. and so if you needed to know something about an instrument, you went to Stan, and if he was in a good mood, he'd tell you. But if he wasn't in a good mood, if he was having a bad day, you couldn't pry anything out of him. One of the best things about Mandolin Brothers was not only the selling and buying of instruments, because I bought some instruments there over the years, and I've also sold them some instruments over the years. It was repair work, and for the longest time, I would get my guitars fixed at Mandolin Brothers, because you knew that if you went there, you might pay a little bit extra, but it was worth the extra money to get your guitar repaired by somebody like Leroy, Aiello, or Flip, or and then there were a couple other people over the years. But if you had a guitar worked on at Mandolin Brothers, you knew that it was going to be worked on correctly, and that you were going to get it back in just as good, if not better, condition than when you brought it in. I've brought my 60s P basses in there to be repaired. I had my dad bought a guitar when he was in his early 30s, just before I think just after I was born, actually. He there was a guitar luthier and maker in Brooklyn on Atlantic Avenue called Del Pilar. And Del Pilar made classical guitars. My dad bought a classical guitar from him in 1954. And the guitar fell into disrepair, and I brought it to Mandolin Brothers to be repaired. I believe Leroy worked on it, if I'm not mistaken. And I still have the guitar in my collection. And I just, he did such a great job on it, because my dad's been gone for a while, but he loved this guitar. It's actually my first introduction to instruments, was this Del Pilar classical guitar that my dad bought. It was made just for him, and I still have the receipt from it. And I think my father was paying like $10 a week until he paid it off. Then he could take it. It took maybe about a year and a half, or $10 a month, something like that. Anyway, there was very few people that I would entrust fixing that guitar, and Leroy and Mandolin Brothers were the place that I brought it to be repaired. So I mean, the other thing too is that you knew that when you walked in the door that you were going to pay a little bit more than you would in any other music store, but it was worth it at the end of the day, because I don't think Stan kept anything in there that wasn't special, and especially when it came to vintage instruments. He was all about, Stan and Hap for that matter were all about what makes an instrument special. Why is this what separates this instrument from another one? What is it? The sound? Is it the history of it? Is it the pedigree? And you always knew that you had a special guitar if you bought it at Mandolin Brothers. Now, I'm a touring musician, along with the other, my record work and my songwriting, but I am a touring musician, and I travel all over the world, and I could be in Tokyo and people know Mandolin Brothers. I could be in Europe, and people know Mandolin Brothers. And you live on Staten Island? Isn't that where Mandolin Brothers is? And that's a great thing. Have you ever gone there? Yeah, I go there all the time. I know Stan. And you know, a lot of people say I know Stan, but not too many people knew Stan. Like if I walked in there today and Stan was still with us, he'd be like, "Do I know you? You know, do I know who you are? Yeah, I'm Kasim, Stan. I've been here a million times. Oh yeah. It's good to see you." But he was a really, really good guy, really nice guy. Horrible to negotiate with, but a good guy. So I have been blessed with a long career, and while I just don't do just music anymore these days. People have to they have to broaden their horizons and kind of stretch out and do a lot of things. You know, the music industry more and more becomes a young man's game, and for the more senior members of the community, we always have to find new ways to reinvent ourselves. So I compose for television and film. I do my own solo shows. I have a band that is my version of Utopia. I have a radio show called It's My World, and welcome to it. We're on in 9 markets. Our flagship station is WDST in Woodstock, New York. I'm very proud of the show. It's a 1-hour musical journey that with some cool backstories. We play a lot of records, and I talk about my career. I also I'm a cook too. I love cooking. I'm a pretty good cook, and you know I think that right now currently I'm working on a few different projects. I'll be doing some solo shows in the spring of 2023. As well as my work with the Gilmore Project. It's been 50 years since the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon was released. So I'm in a so I am in a band that where we go out as we celebrate the music of Pink Floyd. I'm doing that, and then I still work with Todd Rundgren on when his solo stuff comes out, and he does solo tours. I still tour with Todd and play on his records. And yeah, I mean this weekend I'm with Glenn Burtnick. I shouldn't really say it because it's this weekend, but I work with a bunch of different musicians all the time. Mark Rivera from Billy Joel's band, Glenn Burtnick, Steve Conti, you know, all the musicians that I grew up with and still to this day admire and work with. I'm very, 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 very lucky to have a career in the music business right now. So there you go. That's me. I have a new album out. It's called Kasim 2021. I couldn't think of a better title. It came out in 2021, and one of the songs on it was in a podcast that we did earlier this year called Unsung, about a musician with 3 kids who plays in front of thousands and thousands of people, gets on the private plane, flies home, gets off into the limo, and the wife calls and says, "Don't forget the pails need to go out and you need to buy a gallon of milk on the way home, idiot." And one of the songs on it is called Unsung, and it goes like I forget the first word, the first verse. life is unsung. There's no refunds. Still at the page trying to find the right ones. Unsung. There's no refunds. Trying to write the tune, yeah, to a life unsung. Two sides of the same coin can't join. That's my conundrum. I'm on the road paying all my bills, yeah. Thank God for Rundgren. People see what they wanna see. They see the fantasy, I will admit. Take a look behind the curtain and you'll see that it's all just bullshit. So that's on my latest record, and I screwed it up, but don't use the part that I made a mistake on.
Not at all. Thank you.
Sure. Do you want me any other B-roll? Do you need?
If you could maybe bass. You could
Oh,
sing
yeah,
or
right.
stand.
You can't really hear it though.
Yeah, pass the web on that.
I should just talk about it then.
Sure.
Well, you could. Yeah. Tell me about that bass. Tell me about that
Okay.
bass.
You ready? So, I am one of the luckiest people in the world because I get to have a guitar that has my name on it. And this is a bass that I designed, and it's been out for about maybe, 2022? So maybe 10 years now, actually. We started making them in 2012. A friend of mine who was the head of a rather large music store out of Berlin, Wisconsin, called Interstate Music, approached me and he asked me if I wanted to talk about making a guitar, and I said, yeah, sure, absolutely. As long as I have complete control over the design, the body, the electronics, the wood, the headstock, and all the design work. And I said, and it can't cost a mortgage payment. You have to be able to afford it. Because when a kid goes into a music store and looks for a guitar, and he says to his dad, I'd like that bass on the wall, and it's like $3,000. The father said, maybe you should think about playing kazoo, because I am not spending $3,000 on a guitar. But this bass is a $500 bass. I use it on all my records and all my live shows, and it's right off the shelf. And it's a great guitar. It's called the Kasim Salt and Bass, the K bass, and I love it.